Hi everyone, in this video we're going to look at how to actually create a dialogue conversation with the node-based dialogue system that I developed. First of all, I'm going to assume that you've already gotten the Unity package and that you've extracted it and imported it into your project. So I'm going to be using this demonstration project that comes with the Unity package. The scene is called dialogtest.unity, which can be found in the scenes folder of the actual asset itself. So to start with, once you extract the Unity package into your project, you'll find the editor under the window menu under dialogue editor. And the window you're going to see looks like this. We have this kind of grid over here, which is going to be the actual node editor. This is where you place nodes and connect them. And then over here we have our side window. The side window is going to have these 4 items here. So if you save the canvas, you can save the asset that you've created as an asset file. And we'll talk about all of these in more detail as we go. The load canvas allows you to load an asset so you can modify it. New canvas will create a new canvas and wipe everything you currently have here and basically set it back to the default. Recalculate all will force each node in the editor to run the calculate function, which we'll talk about a little later. And the handle size will adjust the size of the input and output handles on each node. Number of times conversation can happen. This is related to basically how many times do you want to allow this dialogue conversation to occur in the game. I use -1 to represent infinity. So if you want this dialogue to be able to happen any number of times, you just set this to -1. So the example here is like, perhaps you have a certain dialogue conversation that occurs between the player and an NPC. If you set this to 1, then you can interact with that NPC 1 time and get that specific dialogue conversation. But after you finish that conversation, you'll never run into that conversation again throughout the game. If this is set to -1 infinity times, or say 2 or 3 times, whatever, you can actually run into that dialogue conversation more than 1 time. Probability of the conversation occurring is a sliding scale between 0 and 1.0. So basically these represent percentages, 0 being 0%, 1 being 100%, 0.5 being 50%, etc. So the main idea with this is to create more dynamic dialogue options for kind of like add-on dialogue stuff that's not necessarily story critical, because your story critical dialogue will probably always happen. But say you have NPCs walking around your city in your game and they can interact with each other. Maybe they have like 4 or 5 different dialogues they can go through, and each of those dialogues can have a probability of occurring. So you can set one to like 30%, another to 70%, for instance. And those probabilities are independent, meaning that the 30% is always 30%, the 70% is always 70%. And if the 30% gets hit, then the 70% won't run. If the 70% gets hit, the 30% won't run. If you want the dialogue to always run, just set it to 100% here. So to actually make a dialogue conversation, we have a finite state machine system. And so if I right click in here, I can add a dialogue or a choice. I'm going to start with adding a dialogue. And our states look like this. We can click and drag on them. I can right click on it to delete it. This state has a name at the top, state 1, and these automatically number themselves based on how many states are in the scene, in the editor. I'll discuss the inputs and outputs here in a moment. So player initiates conversation. This was only going to show up on a start node, and start nodes are nodes that do not have any inputs. And this is an input right here. So since I don't have anything coming into the state, I'm allowed to say if the player initiates this conversation or not. If I check this box, what this means is that this conversation only activates when the player activates it. The alternative is if I don't check this box, it's possible that the conversation can be activated by, say, an NPC walking up to the player, or the NPC walking up to another NPC. For this demonstration, I'll do player initiates conversation. We also have add and remove speaker buttons. So if I want multiple speakers to say something simultaneously in this state, I can add speakers, and you'll see that the list basically gets pushed and more speakers can be added here. Additionally, I can pop speakers off by hitting remove speaker. One bug I do have is that this does not resize unless I hit collapse and uncollapse it. And that's another feature, is the collapse will basically allow us to collapse the state so that we have a smaller area, or that it frees up our area a little bit, because I don't have a zoom feature currently. So it's helpful to be able to collapse states to clean up your workspace. So for every speaker that you have a speaking character which takes a game object. So I can click on this little dot here, and this will look in my Unity assets in the project, and it's specifically looking for prefabs, items that are not in the scene but that are specifically prefabs. So any character that you want to speak has to be created as a prefab. So let's say we want to talk to Braid. So then we see a visual representation of the character so that we can easily see who says something here. And say he just says, you know, hey, what's up? And so this is the dialogue he'll actually say. And then to actually display the dialogue, the system I implemented uses a speech bubble style. And what this is basically if I click select here, I can choose like a normal dialogue, or I can do like a exclamation or like an inner monologue or this kind of loopy looking dialogue. And what you'll notice is the styles are actually split between two PNGs. So I have a normal dialogue, and then I have a normal dialogue body and a normal dialogue tail. And the body and tail have the same width dimensions as this file, but not the same height dimensions. And they all follow a similar naming syntax. So I'll make a separate video to talk about how you actually create your own speech bubbles, because it is kind of weird system, and it's top on my list of priorities of refactoring because I don't really like how it's implemented currently. But I'll choose normal dialogue for this, and so when he speaks, the text is going to show up in the white area here in the box. So let's transition this to a choice node. So I can add a dialogue choice node by right-clicking, choosing add dialogue choice. And now I can start connecting states. So for next dialogue state, I can click and drag on the diamond here, and a Bezier curve gets drawn. And I can drag it here to the previous dialogue state of the choice node and let go, and it now creates this connection between the two. And what this says is that this state, when the user finishes reading and they press spacebar or whatever key you want to go next, it's going to fire to this state. And in this state, we have up to 9 dialogue options, with each choice corresponding to the alphanumeric key on your keyboard. So option 1 is number 1 on your keyboard, 2 is number 2 on the keyboard, etc. And from here, I can start creating branching dialogue. So I can add a dialogue node, and let's say connect option 1 to here. And you'll see a couple options change once I connect to a choice state. Because this node knows that it's going to a choice state, or coming from a choice state, I should say, we do have this option to transition back to a previous choice node after this state's finished. And what this means is that if I selected this, it allows me to choose a choice state I want to go back to. And this only happens on nodes that are part of a choice branch that do not have an output. So you'll notice how this is not connected to anything. This allows me to choose this option. For instance, if I connected this to here, I actually lose that option. And that's because this is no longer a final state. This is no longer a state that doesn't go anywhere. This is a state that fires specifically to this state, which now I can transition this one back to the previous node. So let me delete this, and we'll see the option come back again. I'll select this. And in here, when I start adding more choice states to the state machine, you'll see them show up in this pop-up list, and you can choose which one to transition back to. And the name of the state can be seen on the actual dialogue state here, where it says choice state 1. So that's how I know which choice state to go back to. I'm actually going to uncheck this for this option here. And then dialogue description, this only shows up on nodes that are coming directly from a choice state. And what the dialogue description is precisely that. It's a description of what this dialogue says. And this is what shows up when you're given a choice. So if I put, let's say positive response, right? What this is going to do is when I'm given the choice, it's going to print out 1 period space positive response, right? To give my player an idea of what's going to be said, or like what kind of response I'm going to be giving to Braid as he asks me, hey, what's up? And then the rest of this is all similar to the original node. So I can just say like nothing much, having a good day, and you. And I can give them a dialogue type. And then what I'm going to do is collapse this node, and let's create another branch. So I'm going to make another node, and we'll drag option 2 to here. And we'll call this one negative response. And we'll say not much, having having a pretty bad day. And then what we'll do is we'll start working out some of these other branches. So let's connect this positive response state to here. And this will be Braid just kind of telling us, you know, hey, that's great. Hope your day continues to be wonderful. And we'll do like an exclamation dialogue there. And that will just be a final state here. So after we hit this state, it's going to close the dialogue out and we'll be done with it. However, maybe we want to do something a little more complex with the negative response. So let's connect this node to here. And so we say, not much, having a pretty bad day. And maybe Braid's trying to be, you know, supportive, and he says, oh no, do you want to talk about it? And so here we'll get an example of a branch or of multiple choices where we can transition back to choices. So let's make a dialog choice node, and then this state's going to connect to here. So then this choice state, so Braid's basically asking us if we want to talk about it. So maybe I can say vent frustration for this option, right? I could say I stubbed my toe earlier and it really hurts. Sad face. You can tell my dialogue is severely lacking. Anyway, so then, you know, maybe Braid responds and he says, "Aw man, that sucks. It really hurts when you stub your toe. Hope it feels better soon." And then maybe we'll close out this branch with the player responding, saying, "Thanks for your condolences. Take it easy." And so that will end that branch, essentially. So, and then we can make a different branch here. So let's do option 2 goes here. And one thing you'll notice, I also forgot to mention this, when we come directly from a choice state into a normal node, you'll see that it automatically fills the player as the speaking character. And the reason it does this is because I never imagined a situation where an NPC or somebody who's not in control of the game is going to be responding to a choice in a dialogue. I always imagined that only the player would ever actually be giving a choice response. So I just automatically have the code autofilling the player game object here when you're coming directly from a choice state. That is something that if for whatever reason you needed more dynamic behavior with like a different player or something like that, you could always go into the code and kind of take that feature out. So let's say this option is to be reserved. I don't know if I feel comfortable talking about it, ... And we'll put this here, and we'll collapse this. And then we'll connect, and maybe Braid's pushing back a bit. He's going to say, "Are you sure? I'm a really good listener. I might be able to help." And this is actually going to transition to a choice node. And what we're going to transition back to is choice state 2, to this state here, because we're basically going to be like, you know, we're going to be reserved and reluctant to talk to him about it. And when we do that, he's going to try and push us a little bit like, oh, you know, I might be able to help you out. And so it will give you a choice again if you want to vent your frustrations or not. So this is actually not a final state. Even though we're not going to a state here, this option is pretty much like saying that this connection winds back to this node over here. It's just that we're not actually drawing that. So let's add a final choice here, third choice, which is basically going to be like leave conversation. And this is going to be the player getting really defensive, saying, "I don't have to tell you anything. Leave me alone." I'll say it in an exclamatory way. And then maybe the final state will be an inner monologue where we'll have Braid kind of saying, he's just trying to help. What a jerk. And we'll do the thought bubble. And so this is kind of like, this is our state machine. So we've basically created some branching options here. And we'll see how this plays out. I'll keep these options over here default. And real quick, just to show you how the handle size works, as I lower and increase this, we can see those diamonds getting larger and smaller. 16 is the default size. You can always change that if you want. So let's go ahead and hit Save Canvas. And one thing I want to point out is when you click Save Canvas, let me go back here real quick. What's going to happen is the code is going to look at every node and make sure that you have something assigned to the speech bubble and something assigned to the speaking character. If any node does not have either of these, or both of these, sorry, if any node in the system does not have both of these set to something, then it will give you an error and not allow you to save until you fix it. And it will tell you which node specifically, like which state needs to have something assigned. And the reason for that is to avoid null reference object exceptions when you run the game. So let's go ahead and click Save Canvas. And the default save is going to be under Assets, Resources, Dialog. And it's always going to do this unless you change this manually in the code. So you're going to want to make sure that this directory exists in your project for this to work properly. Because even though you could save this anywhere, the dialog loader is specifically referencing this file path. So like I said, you can change it in the code if you want, but this is the default location. So I'm just going to call this Braid player, and it's going to save as a .asset file, and we'll hit save. And now if I close this and I look in my dialog folder, we'll see the Braid player asset. And this is pretty interesting. There's a lot of sub assets here, and we can see all of our data over here on the right. This is stuff you probably don't need to really bother with unless you are looking to extend the editor in the code base. You might care about some of this data. So if that is your interest, you might want to actually look at some of the stuff going on in here. It might help you visualize what you need to do. So let's go ahead and play and make sure everything looks good. So I played, I don't see any errors showing up. So my character is going to walk over to Braid, and when I get close enough to him, I'll be able to interact. And if I press E, it will start the dialogue, and we see the bubble. He says, "Hey, what's up?" And I get these choices for a positive or a negative response. So let's look at the positive response by pressing 1. It says, "Nothing much, having a good day, and you?" And he says, "Hey, that's great. I hope your day continues to be wonderful." There is some bugginess here in that the text is kind of not within the bounds that I want, and this is due to the jagged nature of this text bubble. That's something I'll need to fix as we go, or it could possibly just be fixed by using a different sprite for the bubble. So the conversation's done, but I can talk to him again because I didn't set a restriction on how many times this conversation could happen. So he's going to say, "Hey, what's up?" And let's go with the negative response and see how that branching tree works with going back to choice states. So I say, "Not much, having a pretty bad day." He says, "Oh no, do you want to talk about it?" So let's take the branch that ends properly. We'll say vent frustration. "I stubbed my toe earlier, it really hurts, sad face." "Oh man, that sucks. It really hurts when you stub your toe. Hope it feels better soon. Thank you for your condolences. Take it easy." And so let's look at the other option where I do go back to the choice state. So "Not much, having a pretty bad day. Oh no, do you want to talk about it?" So I can say "Be reserved." It says, "I don't know if I feel comfortable talking about it." He says, "Are you sure? I'm a really good listener. I might be able to help." And so I get my choice again. I can vent my frustration, be reserved, or leave the conversation. Maybe I want to just leave the conversation. "I don't have to tell you anything. Leave me alone." And he's thought bubble, "I was just trying to help. What a jerk." And we're done. So we can make changes to that dialogue now by going back into the editor, choosing Load Canvas, Braid Player Asset, and let's say I want to limit the number of times this dialogue happens. Let's put this to 1, and we'll save the file and replace it. And let's play again, and we'll see that, let's go talk to him once. Also, to go to the next part of the text, I'm pressing spacebar, and that's how I have it hard coded in the code right now, but you can change that. And then if I try talking to him again, I can't have that dialogue interaction because I set the limit to only occur one time. So let's go ahead and set that back to infinity. And just to give you an idea of how the probabilities work, let's go ahead and set this probability to, say, 50%. So do 0.5. One thing I just ran into that I'd like people to be aware of, because I haven't figured out how to get around this yet. If you have this side window over here is not technically its own thing separate from this background. So if I'm trying to click something over here and there's actually a node behind it, so like this, for instance, it's actually clicking the node, not the slider. So it is something, if you run into that issue, you might want to move your scene around and then try clicking over here. So that's another bug that I have on my list to fix. So we're going to put this at a 50% probability. And then we're going to make a new canvas, and we're going to have a braid conversation again. That's just going to, I'm just going to do some real quick dialogue. So like test, and then right here, we'll have player response. It says like test 2, and that will be it. And we'll set this to a 50% probability, and we'll save this as braid player 2. So what's going to happen is the in-game, if I keep talking to Braid over and over, I should be getting kind of a mixture of responses. So, and the thing is, remember that this is pseudo-random number generation, so it might not seem random all the time, but that's because true randomness is true randomness. There, so I got, out of 4 times, I got this one time so far, so it's not 50% probability, but I have tested this with, I hard-coded some test cases that ran about 1 million times, and I did confirm that the distributions were pulling the proper probabilities. So you can see, though, how I'm getting, sometimes I'm getting the first conversation, other times I'm getting this test conversation, right? So this is kind of how you can create, yeah, see, so kind of getting back and forth now, different outcomes there. So that's kind of the probability in action. So let's talk real quick about what you need in your scenes for this to work. You're going to need to have the dialogue loader prefab. So inside of the package, you should have a prefabs folder with a dialogue folder in it, and there's a prefab for dialogue loader. You'll want to bring this into any scene that you have where dialogue conversations are going to occur. For the speech bubbles to work, you're also going to need this asset, the dialogue canvas, to be in the scene. And you'll also need the conversation handler prefab to be in the scene. So these 3 things right here must be in your scene. Additionally, any character that you want to speak must have several things. They must have a dialogue manager script, as we see here on the right. For my implementation of interacting with the NPC, you need to have this display NPC interaction. However, if you make your own thing, you would just basically replace this instead with whatever interaction script you have. Additionally, any character that speaks has to be tagged as a character, capital C character. And your player, however, does not need to be tagged character. They need to be tagged with capital P player. And additionally, your player must also have a dialogue manager and a player to NPC interaction script. And again, this can be overridden if you have your own NPC interaction scripts. One other thing to note is that the dialogue canvas does have a tag called dialogue canvas. So if your project does not contain that, you'll want to make sure that you add that. As well as the dialogue canvas is using render mode screen space camera for the UI. So you will need to set the camera that you're using in your scene. I do have a prefab for the main camera inside here if you want to use it, but you can have your own camera if you'd like, and then just drag and drop it onto the render camera here. So that should be about all you need to actually make this work. Basically, if you just reference this dialogue test Unity scene, you'll see all the things that you need for the system to work. And if you just watch the rest of the video, you should get an idea of how to actually create the dialogue conversations using the editor. So hopefully this helps you, and I do appreciate anybody who has checked this out and is using it. Hopefully you find it somewhat useful and extendable, and I do hope to update this and try and fix some of the bugs that I have been facing, but I can't make the guarantee it will happen soon. Once my semester starts this fall, I'm going to be really busy, so I'll try to get to it when I can. But again, thank you for your interest and your support, and good luck on your games.